Hello, I'm Barbara Lee Diamondstein for Inside Fashion. Today we'll be talking to the celebrated fashion designer, Shamask. Shamask draws on forms from the art and architecture of many cultures to create clothes that are both classic and the epitome of high fashion. Through his very carefully composed shapes and uncluttered detail, he makes fashion a fine design art. A very warm welcome to you, Shamask. How would you describe your work?
My work is based on recent concept of beauty. It has to do with elimination rather than applied decoration. Decoration is something that hides the structure. That's something that stylists would use as a tool to camouflage mistakes, problems, and anything like this. When you reduce and eliminate, all you have left is cut and proportion, and of course the seams are then conspicuous, which become the decorative part of clothes.
Why don't we take a moment and explain to us what the logic and reasoning is of this applied seam?
Well, the lower seam forms a triangle, and which you can't see here, and then goes into a pocket. So it both is the construction of the garment, also it's decorative, as I'm pointing out, the seaming. If you have to pretend that the seams shouldn't be there, or if you have to say, well, this dart is ugly and please don't look at it, then I think we have failed in a certain way to create something that's totally beautiful. To me, if they are there, they better be placed in a place that is exciting, and in a place that makes it decorative, and in a place that makes it interesting in relation to proportion, in relation to cut.
You spent most of your childhood in Amsterdam before you moved to Australia at the age of about 15. Why Australia in the mid-1960s?
My parents went there, so they wanted to go to somewhere that away from Europe, and I wanted to go to a place like Australia.
What did you do with yourself in those early days in Australia? Did you know early on that you wanted to be a designer?
Well, since I was a child, I always designed and drew and painted.
What was your first job?
The circumstances were such that I had to start working immediately. And my first job, because I did not speak English, was pushing a trolley, in an department store. But in the back of my mind, of course, I was a designer and an artist, and I was doing display, and that was the closest form to art that I could get to at that time.
Window display, do you mean?
Yeah. In England, after I left Australia, a friend of mine was doing fashion illustrations in London, making a lot of money. I thought it was a great idea. So I had never done this, and I took some paper and pencil and I put some drawings together and got a job at the Observer and the Times doing fashion illustration.
The London Observer and the London Times? How'd you get a job like that?
Somehow I managed to convey the essence that fashion drawings were supposed to have, or to describe the garment that I was illustrating, so I was fortunate. It's not that much difference actually between designing a window to designing a chair to designing a concert to a symphony to designing a garment.
Do you really believe that?
Yeah. I think the rules are the same. I think the rules of architecture and the rules of painting and the rules of music is the same. That's why when people say, well, you've only been designing clothes for 4 years, it's really been now over 20 years that I've been designing.
But did you set out to London and that higher horizon with the intent of becoming a fashion designer?
No, because I was never really interested in fashion or trends.
What was your intent then?
To be a painter, which I did do for a while. Now, of course, because of clothes, and in some way clothing is a movable sculpture. It's somebody that wears something in a certain shape and certain color and moves through space. And it's three-dimensional, and you can walk around it, or they can walk around you.
Why don't you tell us briefly how you finally wended your way to the United States?
Well, actually, I had never really had any desire to come to the States, and the opportunity came about when a multimedia company that was sponsored by the Council of the Arts in Buffalo.
The New York State Council on the Arts.
It was the late 60s when I was there. And I was asked to be artist in residence for a multimedia company, which was mostly dance-oriented. The people that were the head of the company was Christine Lawson, who came from the Martha Graham School, and her husband was Graham Smith, who was from the Royal Ballet in London, who was Australian. And I ended up doing something for the ballet, a ballet company in Australia, and so I kept in touch, and they kind of followed what I was doing, and I followed what they were doing, and it seemed that it was appropriate to go into theater, and because I believe very much in total design.
Do you think your work would be different if you had some formal training and education?
I probably would take less risk. I might question less because I would maybe know the answers. And by questioning, of course, it sets up a whole stream of thought-provoking possibilities. Because once you start questioning, it can lead you to all sort of end results that you might otherwise not have.
Were the designs that you created mostly for dance?
No, it was dance, film, acting, it was music. It was actually very much at the beginning of the Bob Wilson kind of movement. And that provided me with, of course, an insight how everything is a marriage when you present something.
What's the marriage of fashion and the other arts that you create?
Well, actually, it goes back to the very first fashion show that I did. And what happened was that it was a very small collection of 15 pieces. And it was done in my showroom. And if you have 15 pieces and 6 models, and you have everybody there, you better have people walk slow.
Very slowly.
So that it lasts longer. However, it works for me because it gives people the opportunity to see every seam, every detail, but where people become indeed sculptures. I like the thought of presenting them like a living mobile, and I choreographed it in such a way that it was exciting because nothing happened. You had to focus and you had to learn to think and learn to see, and therefore that was the purpose of the slow walking models, the rigid choreography, the like I said, mobile effect that I was creating. I wanted people to see the structure, to see the detailing.
It sounds, though, like the very contrast to costume design. Of necessity, nothing can be subtle for a costume on the stage. How did you translate that experience to your current one?
I think there are very many forms of theater, and in some way our life is theater in a subtle way. And what I mean by that, it's a ceremony, and clothes is a ceremony. Theater is considered dramatic, but when you look to the kabuki or the no theater in Japan, it is an exercise of subtleties. Of course, from the no theater, I learned a lot, and I'm sure Mr. Bob Wilson learned a lot.
That may be almost the key to your own sense of fashion design, a kind of reductionism rather than embellishment. Is that a fair description?
Absolutely, yeah.
I remember you were once telling me that you were raised to believe that nothing was possible. And here you are, a triumph of optimism and success. Whatever sustained you in this young life of yours to dare to try?
I think Holland, like any European country, has an obligation to history. And history, of course, can be very intimidating. Australia, like America, has a history that's very short, so the obligations are not as much felt. And Australia really taught me that everything is possible.
How did you wend your way, and when did you do so, to New York City?
I came to New York permanently, I think in 1972, and when I first got here, I thought, well, I'm successful in Buffalo, all I have to do is sit back and opportunities will arise and I will find work. Of course, that doesn't happen.
So what did you do?
Interior architecture, fabric design, I would design sweaters, I would design screens or bathtub, I would design.
And how'd you get these jobs?
To a certain extent, people knew what I was doing, and once you have one job, it kind of leads to others. And then I got a private client who requested, after I had designed a house interior, if I would design a fur coat. I designed a coat that was a combination of both knit and fur, and it was done in a way that the furrier, as well as the knit people, had no idea what the end result was going to be like, because it was all in pieces, it was like a puzzle. And when it was brought together, Maximilian, Madame Petrarch, put it together with me. So that was my first involvement in clothes. And I realized again that fashion could be an important form of design that not necessarily have anything to do with trends or fads like other mediums.
Fashion, the inside story, will return in a moment. We now return to Fashion, the inside story.
Then you finally decided to go into business on your own. How did you go about doing that?
I really felt that I wanted to be in business with somebody that I related to, which gave me enough control as well as a communication and respect for the other person to create a working vehicle.
Well, you found a partner, as I recall, sometime in the late 1970s, along about 1979. Can you tell us a little bit about that arrangement?
My partner is Mr. Murray Moss, and we are involved in every aspect of the company. Of course, he's as involved in design as I'm involved in the business part of the company.
You made reference before to your interest in Japanese design, and we talked about the minimalist, non-embellished approach that you have to your work. I've often wondered if the kimono was a particular source of inspiration to you.
I think it's probably a source of inspiration to most people that are interested in design, architecture, art, because it was unique as it is a one-size-fits-all garment. and it is an absolute perfect design as far as that it fits everybody, and it allows flexibility for height and different sizes.
Do you think this country produces stylists or designers?
I think with exception, probably stylist. Mr. Klein, Calvin Klein, is brilliant at it, and I admire him for it. I think that's obviously it's a area that's very large. I think it's the biggest part of our industry, and I can see why one would. I think he's exceptional because he is very good at it. But I can see why that area is more attractive to people than designing, because it's much harder to design.
Who would you call a designer? Yourself excluded, of course.
In America, I'm sure there are a lot of people that are designers that properly never been exposed or accepted, or are doing it without getting recognition or finding the needs or the funds.
But among those that we know, or at least that we can identify, who would you classify as a designer?
I really, in the United States, I find it very, very hard to think of anybody.
And on an international level?
Well, I think certainly, like I said, Issey Miyake, Gianfranco Ferré, and probably Armani. I haven't quite decided on that yet.
And no one French?
I think Yves Saint Laurent, of course.
Now, is he a designer or a stylist?
I think he's probably both. I think he probably made a great marriage between those two elements.
You've managed to create a very unusual design technique. I wonder if you can tell us about the innovative method that you've developed.
Because I did not know anything about fashion, I asked a close friend of mine, Betsy Johnson.
Is that Betsy Bunkianini,
Yes,
Betsy Johnson?
What do you do? And she said, well, to design and make clothes is like baking a cake. You first buy all the ingredients. And she said, buy your pins and your muslin. And of course, when you have these things, then what you do? I had absolutely no idea. So I tried to use the means that I had from the past, which was that I knew how to do a blueprint and I knew how to do drawings on scale. So in frustration, I used my drawing method that I used for architecture to draw for clothes. I would do life-size, actual-size blueprints, which was very rigid. When you work in the real fabric or muslin, you have to become totally spontaneous and allow the fabric and allow the muslin to dictate to you what it wants to do. Because anything you might do on the flat or a drawing not necessarily works in the fabric.
Can you tell us something about this spiral seam, which you seem to have invented and that you use on so many of your designs? Is there a spiral seam, by the way, on the dress that I'm wearing?
No. It was based on the peel of orange or lemon, if you will. And what happened was that I wanted to design a coat that at first glance was a basic, ordinary shape that was pleasing and flattering. However, I wanted to indicate and place the seams in a way that they fall around the body in a beautiful manner and that they became decorative. It is a different way of creating structure. It's a different way of seeing truth, and of course, it's unexpected, which is, and anything unexpected creates emotion.
The design of clothing for you is, I guess, a vehicle to do many other things. In fact, you've said that you only spend 5% of your time designing. Could you tell us what you do the other 95% of the time?
I have a very small company, and when you have very few people involved in the company, you end up doing a lot of things yourself. The marketing, the advertising, the promoting, the production. Production, for instance, takes a long time. After a garment is finished, we start from scratch.
One of the things I imagine you don't spend a great deal of time on is the selection of colors. You only use a few, and I wonder why you've decided to do that and what colors they are.
Red, black, white, navy. All I really need in order to bring the garment to completion is have a fabric that is basic and that has a color that is flattering, and I think you can find it in primary colors. Sometimes I would like to use other colors, but I think the design would have to probably change in order to balance that.
Did you ever expect your work to receive the kind of attention that it has?
I think one of the reasons it did get attention was that if there's nothing more shocking than simplicity, and I think I became conspicuous by doing very little.
Well, that very little has caused a great deal of reaction in the press. In fact, criticism about your work appears as frequently in design and in art journals nearly as in the fashion press. What do you think this says about the current state of fashion, in fact, vis-a-vis the other arts?
I think fashion goes through many, many changes, and through history, of course, artists get involved in fashion, and what that means is that people like Popova from the Russian constructivist who designed clothes, because they felt that the only true form of art was designing for the masses. I also think that, on the other hand, it's frowned upon as an important art.
Is fashion an art or a business or something else entirely?
I think with most forms of art, I think it's both. It's marriage between business and art.
Did you ever expect your life to unfold the way it has?
Yes and no. I did not know I would be doing this. I think it's probably the last thing that I thought I would be doing.
Is there another thing that you think you might be doing? What next?
I don't really know. I'm having a good time. So I'm enjoying very much what I'm doing.
And we enjoyed it too. Thank you very much, Ronaldus Shamask,